Welcome again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in the very first app prep workshop for the 2024 application cycle. We're going to be talking about preparing to apply and the applicant timeline today. My name is Karen Draper, or Karen D, and I'm a pre-health staff advisor at the UC Davis Health Professions Advising Office. I advise for all health professions and topics, but I do take special interest or more appointments with folks that might have some GPA concerns, rebuilding the GPA, along with our applicants as well. So super excited to be here with you all today and, really kick off your journey for the application cycle. Okie dokie. So the first thing I wanted to start off with is, who is HPA? What can we do for you as a UC Davis student or even an alumni? So we serve all students and alumni, no matter when they graduated, no matter what major, no matter what health professional career you're pursuing. We are here for all of it, and we're here to support you until you get accepted. HPA staff are trained in all topics, including the application process. So we are trained in, how do we write good personal statements? What are schools looking for in that? The experiences section, but also questions you might have about letters of rec or interview prep and all of those good things from A to Z. Taking a deeper dive into what does HPA do? So we do provide advising, one-on-one support, and we do that through our express advising. So that's just, you give us a call during our open hours, and if someone's available, we'll just go ahead and answer your questions. If we're busy at the time, or maybe it's the weekend, you can go ahead and leave a message, and then we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We get a lot of good questions here, and we definitely think this is a great opportunity, especially if something just kind of comes up out of nowhere. We also have Zoom drop-in advising, and oh no, it is cut off. I will, I'll put a link. If you just go to the HPA website, you'll get everything that you need. But yeah, that's super sorry about that. Okay, and then Zoom drop-ins, all questions and topics are welcome. Those are where our staff advisors are. It is first come, first serve, and it is limited to about a 15-minute session, but you might be surprised with how much we can accomplish in a 15-minute session, especially if you go regularly or can even come multiple times within a week. Sometimes people think, well, I need a long time for my question, and that's okay. But if we go to 3 Zoom drop-ins, that's already 45 minutes together, and we can accomplish a lot in 45 minutes. At Zoom drop-ins, we can also edit and revise materials as well. So definitely this is a great place to bring in personal statements and all of those good things. And then, of course, we also have our scheduled 30-minute appointments, and all questions and topics are also welcome at those sessions as well. When navigating the scheduled appointment system, I do encourage just choosing the correct profession and the correct topic, so that way you can be matched with an advisor that can help you with your questions. And for those who are alumni, again, we are still here for you. You still have access to everything as if you were a student here with HPA. However, you might have seen that email notice from the university that they are going to be taking away email access to alumni after a certain point. That does not affect your access to HPA. And so how it works is you'll actually just still navigate through our appointment system and tell us who you are, and then we go from there, and you can still schedule an appointment with us. Okay. So for programming, we offer a lot of program support for our applicants in particular. And this is super unique across kind of college campuses in general. So we're super proud of what we can do to provide for our applicants. And we created this for a purpose. We know there's a lot of steps. We know that it's confusing. We know there's so much going on all the time. So we created this series for you and all of the other programming that we do as well. It's for our students in mind to better support them to be more competitive applicants. So of course, we do have this app prep program series, and I'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about it too. We have info sessions from schools, virtual and in person. Great way to get connected with them, learn more about their school. And we also continue to partner with clubs throughout the year as well. I do want to say email listservs. So HPA, we do have two. We have the applicant listserv, which you can subscribe to on our App Prep program website page. And we also have our general HPA newsletter. In my opinion, both are super important for applicants to be on. The applicant listserv is going to be just about applicant things. So updates on this program. And when we have an update, for example, if we have a new event or a registration for an event is just up specifically for applicants, this is where we're going to let you all know first. Or if we have an announcement or an update, like, hey, we're expanding our Zoom drop-in hours, we're going to let applicants know there first. And then the HPA newsletter is where we're going to talk about other things. So events that can still be helpful for applicants, like our spring break road trip or those info sessions. But we're going to be talking about those things there first. And then later on, we'll add in applicant information there too. So super important to stay connected throughout your entire cycle, even after you submit, because there's still going to be some work that we can get done together. Okay, good question. Do we know how long it might take before losing access? So that's a question in regards to email access with UC Davis. Unfortunately, I don't know when they put that cutoff. If I were to have a guesstimate, it would be about a year, but I would encourage reaching out to the IT department at UC Davis to find out. But again, that does not affect your ability to work with HPA. HPA is here for all of our alumni, no matter when they graduated. Okay. Next up, kind of meeting our staff. So I'm definitely not alone. I have many colleagues with us here at HPA who are fellow staff advisors who can support you throughout this process as well. So I just want to give a shout out to all the work that they do. And they're also going to be available at Zoom drop-ins and scheduled appointments as well. A little bit more deeper dive into HPA services. So again, friendly reminder, HPA staff are trained in supporting our applicants in reviewing materials, for example, personal statements, experiences section, secondaries, and even when we need to communicate with schools. And that's going to be super important, especially for our medical and dental school applicants for after they submit. We're still going to want to do some extra work on that front. And again, we can do all of these things at drop-in and scheduled appointments. Super important for us to consider, well, when can we be meeting with you? Okay. Quick application tip. I really do think consistency is key. If we can set up a specific day or time every week or a certain number of hours a week, I think that's where I see applicants make a most difference when applying. I do encourage starting to meet now with HPA. Now is really when we have the most time at drop-ins and when we can even potentially see you more than once at drop-ins. Things are just not as busy right now versus April through about July and even August or later, things are super busy. And we do our best to see as many students as possible all the time. But in reality, right now is just really when wait times are the lowest. So we highly encourage if we can get going on that personal statement and other application questions. The worst thing that can happen is we finish early, right? Or we're finishing right on time. But definitely we encourage getting started on that now and, really starting to make connections with advisors as well. A little bit more background on our App Prep program before we get jumping into content here. So again, this was created for you to help support you every step of the way in this journey, because we know that there's a lot. And as I mentioned, we do have an applicant email listserv to supplement this workshop programming series. And in the listserv, if you're already on it, as you can see, we are going to let you know about when is this recording going to be ready? What is the next session going to be about? And other updates as well. So when we do expand Zoom drop-in hours, or if we have a special applicant event, like mock interviews, when that event happens, later on in the year. We also host winter quarter and spring quarter workshops series, that is App Prep program. And then we also will be hosting interview week in August, where you'll learn all about the different types of interviews. And then we'll do a mock interview at the end. And then in the fall quarter, we'll also have 2 more mock interview events as well. And also there's going to be some other helpful events as well. We can talk at the end about why those are still going to be good to go. If you are a 2025 applicant, you're more than welcome to stick around. I will just give the fair warning that it can be a little bit more than what you might have bargained for. So it might be a lot of information. You're still welcome to stay, but just keeping that in mind that we still do have a lot of extra time to be ready for when you're ready to apply. Okay. Jumping into the content here, and our first question for the audience is, what do you think schools are wondering when they're looking at your application? What do you all think? And you can pop your answers in the chat or even unmute if you feel comfortable. Whether you can make it through school, whether or not you're going to be a good health professional, absolutely. If the applicant is motivated and passionate, definitely agree. Who we are, and will you succeed at their school? Will you contribute to the school if you were to become a professional? I absolutely agree with all of these things. If you have other ideas, please continue to put them in the chat and I'll still take a look at them. But I think we hit the nail on the head here with who are you? What experiences have led you to this moment? Exactly, relevant experiences, and maybe even things you might not consider to be relevant. We'll talk a little bit about that later today. So what past experiences have you had, or even family members had? Why are you passionate? What are your goals? What have you been doing to show these things about you? So they are wondering, who are you? What have you done? How will you contribute to them? How will you contribute to the healthcare field that you're planning to pursue as well? And they're also going to be gauging readiness as well. So in terms of skills, when you think about the type of doctor that you want to be, or health professional, or dentist, or PA, I imagine some of these words might come to mind. Cultural competence, teamwork, communication, social skills. And quite a number of years ago, medical schools actually came together and they came up with this list of skills that they wanted to see in their applicants throughout the application process. So not only in the personal statement, but also the experiences and letters of rec and supplementals, etc. I will give a fair warning that there actually are a couple more competencies. So when I send out this PowerPoint, I'll be updating it with a few more skills that have been added as well. And sometimes applicants wonder, well, you know, I'm not pre-med, I'm pre-PA, or I'm pre-vet, or I'm pre-fill in the blank. And these skills are definitely still going to be applicable, and we definitely would encourage being able to have these directly and indirectly throughout your application. Are there any of these attributes or skills that you have questions about? Capacity for improvement, yeah. Schools are looking, you know, can you take feedback, right? Because things are going to be pretty challenging in whatever health professional school you pursue. You're going to be taking in a lot of information at once. And a lot of this is going to be new. And that's going to include didactic, so, you know, book work, but also clinical. So things like bedside manner. And they're wondering, are you going to be okay with accepting feedback and, you know, making improvements that they think would provide better care to patients? That's a good question. Any other questions about these? Quantitative reasoning. Yeah, so we don't usually talk too much of quantitative reasoning in the writing portions, like the personal statement. That can usually be demonstrated through coursework. However, another place it could be demonstrated would be like if someone were to do research and they share that they do a lot of analysis on experiments and kind of blah, blah, blah. But really they're getting at, you know, do you understand the science behind things and will you be able to apply that as a clinician? Cultural competence, definitely a really good thing. And I believe in the updated competencies that I'll be sharing out, they've actually kind of made some updates to the word choice to be cultural humility. So kind of understanding that you're gonna meet patients who are different than you or from many different backgrounds and different beliefs and values, and kind of recognizing that people will be different from you and how can we accept these differences and actually support them through these things. And how do we support and recognize when patients need more support than maybe others due to access or even barriers to care? If there are any of these words here you're not too sure about, when I send out the PowerPoint or even now, I definitely encourage Googling it to learn more and thinking about, well, when have you done those things? Or how can you show that you've done those things? Really good question. Which of these do I think is the most important? And I think you should be able to kind of think about, or you should think about, what do you think are the most important skills you see within yourself? And we can use these to help guide themes within your writing. And so I definitely encourage for these competencies to start brainstorming, what examples do you have to share? And maybe what are these like, oh, maybe I might need to do a little bit more work on like public speaking, for example, and those kinds of things. Really good discussion points in the Q&A and the chat. Definitely continue both of those. You all are doing a really great job. There is a question in the Q&A, but I am going to talk about that in just a moment when we talk about readiness. Okie dokie. So, what we encourage for every applicant to do before they get started, if possible, with the application process, to kind of sit down and think and have a readiness check-in with yourself or with an advisor. Another way to kind of think about this is if you were to hit submit today, how would your application look? And is there anything different that we want to do between now and when we're going to be hitting submit? So the first piece of the pie, and I'll be using the experiences, attributes, metrics model that medical schools came up with, but is actually a holistic model for the application process that many schools use. So not just medicine, pretty much most schools use this model. And at the center of this is going to be metrics. And something to know and consider is that a lot of schools and programs do have the prerequisite GPA of a 3.0 and above. And that's what we call the safe GPA, because once we get to that point, and of course, the higher we go, we're in a safe zone. If we are at that point or below, our chances increase to getting screened out by a computer. And what that means is a real person, there's a higher chance of a real person not seeing your application. And I don't know about you, but if we're going to spend a lot of time and money, I really want to have a real person take a look at your application. So kind of just being aware of, well, what are cutoffs? Because that can be pretty important to schools. So we do encourage 3.0 and above, or as close as we can get to that, and we're in a much safer zone. Good question. Are repeated classes considered in the GPA? And yes. And something to take note is the original grade and the repeat grade both go in your application. And it might be a little confusing because in OASIS, you can see that if you have any repeats from Davis, they replace the grade. But when we apply to medical, dental, or other health professional schools, they still see both grades. So if you do have repeats, GPA might be a little lower than we might expect. And that can be a really hard conversation, but I promise you, what's easier, knowing now today, or, oh my gosh, I just hit submit and I spent a lot of money and my GPA isn't what I thought it was going to be. Because today, we still have time to change things. We have time to find solutions together. So if you are concerned about your metrics or GPA or your grade trend, definitely let's have a conversation in an appointment or at a drop-in, or let's just, have a chat and start figuring things out together. Competitive GPA, it does kind of change program to program, but if we were talking medical, dental, vet, we're going to be looking at roughly 3.5, 3.6 and above for competitiveness. Other programs, or that also includes PA as well. PA is also pretty competitive. Other programs can be a little bit more forgiving, but again, 3.0 and above, and we're in a safe zone. Same thing if we're considering test scores as well. Once we're in that safe zone, we open a lot of doors. Sometimes applicants think just the high GPA is going to get me in, but this is where a friendly reminder, we're still going to want those experiences. We're still going to want to spend time on that writing. So metrics, again, helps open doors, helps get your application read, but it's not usually the decision of why someone gets in or even where they get in. I think applicants would be really surprised with where folks get in based on GPA because it might be different than what you might expect. Of course, more than happy to answer the question. And I think I've kind of answered the question that was in the Q&A, but if you have follow-up thoughts on that, definitely please continue to put more questions in the Q&A. And any thoughts, questions, or feelings in the caption as well. Does a high grad GPA help with GPA screening, or does the undergrad GPA matter more? Great question, and it will depend on the health profession. In general, in our experience, the undergrad GPA has more weight for medical and dental, and from there, it kind of just depends profession to profession, where we just have that one-on-one talk. And again, if you have that concerns, let's find solutions together, because our goal at HPA is to help you get in, no matter what we're dealing with or what our circumstances are. If you want to be a health professional, we want you to be one too, and we want to find those solutions together. When I did mention that 3.0 and above, we say that for the overall GPA and the science GPA. And sometimes applicants wonder, well, if I'm, 3.1 or 3.2, etc., how is that going to help me? And again, one, we get past those screens, super important. Two, if we have a high grade trend or upward trend, and I'm talking, if we can get it as high as it can go, like 3.6, 3.7, or even higher, we're showing them that you realize you needed to change, that you made those changes, and you're probably doing better in harder upper division science classes. So it can really make a difference. And again, grad GPA can help, but I would say let's have that one-on-one talk of what is your circumstance, what is the profession you're applying to, etc. Okay, there's some good questions here. Distance traveled. Ooh, great question. I will get to that in a moment. If I forget, please remind me. Are there some PA schools that look at the last 60 units upward trend if your overall is not above a 3.0? Ooh, great question. So PA schools are some of the pickiest from what I've seen. And when I say picky, I mean, it's just really competitive field. The number of applicants, the number of seats, and other factors. Coming to mind, I think I can think of one or two PA schools, but in general, each PA school says what GPAs are they looking at. And that can be the overall GPA and science GPA. It could just be the science prereq GPA. So for our pre-PA applicants, we're going to encourage, let's get started this process with your school list, actually. So that way we can see strategically what schools does it make sense to apply to or not, or do we need more time to apply to some others? Okay, last quick question for now. And then, so I studied abroad after I graduated and received a transcripts. Yes, that GPA should still be considered. And AMCAS also has some rules on what to do with the transcript and GPA entry and those things. So they do have that in their handbook. Most of the time, we just put it in with your regular Davis work, but there are exceptions. So I definitely encourage taking a look at the AMCAS handbook for that one. Okay, kind of jumping to experiences really quick, thinking about what experiences do we have that are clinical and even non-clinical. Do we have volunteering experiences or giving back to the community in some shape or form, paid or unpaid? What do we have to share about kind of distance traveled? And what that means is, what have you had to overcome to be where you're at today? Because that might be different than other folks. You might have had to do more work or have gone through more circumstances. And that can and does matter to schools. And how do we share about that in our writing? If you do have questions about letters of rec or concerns, we're going to want to start, building those relationships in order of hopes to get those letters of rec to meet requirements. I would also encourage, keeping in mind how much money do we have to spend in this process, because it does add up price-wise, unfortunately. This is an expensive process. I would also encourage considering, do we have the time as well? Can we set aside time in those things? And remember, it's always going to be up to you when you apply. HPA is going to be here for you no matter what. And so are professional schools. We're both waiting for you to feel at your most confident and competitive. And we're going to be here for you whenever that is, to do whatever it is that we need to do together. Okay. We're going to ask, when should we ask for letters of rec? I'm going to talk about that in the timeline in just a moment. But I'm going to talk about some vocab words first to kind of give us a good foundation. Please continue to put things in the chat and the Q&A. All right. So you all have probably heard about rolling versus deadline admissions. If you could put in the chat what you think the difference is, or even unmute as well. Yes, so rolling admissions applications are being looked at as soon as they're being submitted. So deadline admissions is the traditional admissions process where they wait to review applications until the deadline has passed. Most health professional schools do not do that. A lot of them are on rolling admissions. Rolling admissions means they review applications as they receive them. And so we can think of this as the beginning of the cycle. All of their seats are open, right? And then they start giving out secondaries and interviews and ultimately acceptances. So the number of seats actually goes down over time. So what we encourage is, because we know this now, we encourage applying early and ready for those rolling admissions schools. So we are going to do a timeline activity in just a moment with the different health professions in mind, but most folks are probably going to be hitting submit in June or early July. And so sometimes people hear like, well, if I submit the first day, that's going to really help me. And this is where the readiness part comes in. We don't want to just hit submit just to hit submit. If we need an extra couple of weeks with the writing, that's actually going to be really helpful. We don't want to hit submit on incomplete work when we could have just taken a little extra time to do more edits together, which is why we're going to encourage starting the application process now in January, so we have enough time to do things. There are going to be some schools on deadline admissions, and for example, there are some PA schools, OT schools, technically vet schools are doing this also, but we don't want to just hit submit on the deadline. We do highly encourage submitting at least a few weeks in advance, just in case, because if we're missing something, or if they still need something, or maybe we made a boo-boo somewhere, we're going to have time to fix it. Versus if we submit on the last day and there's a boo-boo, they're actually not obligated to let you fix it once we're past the deadline. So we're going to definitely encourage submitting in advance when possible. Okie dokie. So official transcripts. Right now in Oasis, that's actually going to be your unofficial transcript. So that's not what AMCAS or the application system that you're applying to will receive. So we're going to highly encourage when we are ready that we're going to send the official transcript to the application system and to yourself. That way we can see what they see. And then when we do the transcript entry, things are going to match. Versus when we use the unofficial transcript, things cannot match and then we can have boo-boos. And if possible, you know, we don't want boo-boos, or we don't want that to be the reason why that held us up. I have a question here. Do vet schools do rolling admissions? And in general, no. So typically the deadline to submit the vet school application will be about September 15th. We encourage giving yourself some wiggle room. So we encourage being ready to submit by July 31st. Let's say we're not ready. We still have a couple of weeks left. Hey, August 15th or even around there, we still have cushion. It's still going to be okay. That being said, there are some vet schools where they are still sending out supplementals earlier before the deadline. So that's also another reason why we encourage submitting by the end of August, if possible. What's the difference between official and unofficial? Well, official is the type that the application system is going to get. So there can be differences in like naming or what you can see on your end versus the official transcript end, etc. When we order a transcript from Davis, it's actually free. You've already paid the fee and it's super fast and efficient. If you were to go on right now and send a transcript to yourself, it should take roughly like 15 minutes to get to your email inbox. Do you need an official transcript from high school? Not for high school credits, no. However, if you were dual enrolled in community college, we would need the community college transcript because all higher level institution courses will count. So if you went to community college, or if you even, you know, over the summer, you went to a different school or etc., all of those transcripts we're going to need for the application. And how it works for calculation is all classes will be combined for that overall GPA. And then if you've taken any science classes, those will also be included, etc. So usually the last 60 units would most likely be Davis, unless you did take more classes after you graduated. Okay. So a little bit about the verification process. So how this works is when you hit submit, schools actually don't automatically receive your application at that time. If you're applying through an application system like AMCAS, ADSAS, Nursing CAS, etc. So if we're submitting through to an application system, how it goes is the application system gets your application first, and they are verifying, did you input your classes correctly based on the official transcript that you also sent them. So they're just double checking, did you put the right name? Did you put the right grade? And did you categorize it correctly as a science or non-science class? So that's why, again, super important to use the official transcript because that's what the application system folks have. We want to make sure we have the same thing. And that's the only thing that they're verifying. And that can take quite a bit of time. For AMCAS, it can take, 4 to 6 weeks. For ADSAS, it can take about 3 to 4 weeks. And for a COMIS, early in the cycle, it could be actually really fast, as quick as a day. So each application system is going to be a little different. And then usually as we go later into the cycle, it's going to take a little bit longer. And we don't want to be, we don't want that to be the reason why we're getting held up on things. So once they agree, okay, this all looks good to go, after that is when they start sending it to schools and schools can start looking at things. If they think that there are too many boo-boos, they can send it back to you. In my experience, this really doesn't happen too often. I think applicants are really good at being aware of what are they choosing. So I wouldn't lose too much brain power over that. I encourage focusing more on the writing and knowing it's going to be okay. Of course, if you have questions about which class category, science versus non-science, those are questions that we can talk about, but sometimes we do have to refer back out to the application system because they're the folks that are going to make the final decision. And how do you classify ambiguous science classes? We would really have to take it on a case-by-case basis, but I would encourage considering, did you, in the class, was 51% or more dedicated to learning about science? And you know what science classes are, like OChem, bio, etc. And if you think yes, you can go for it and kind of go from there. So we're going to talk about strategy to submission, I think, in the context of the activity. So I think that'll be okay. And then again, staying connected, super important. We're going to be sticking around together through this program series and afterwards. We're probably going to be seeing each other from January now all the way until really the June of next year. And fingers crossed by then would be accepted. Okay, this is a really big overview of the application timeline. So we highly encourage that app prep begins now in January. We're going to events, going to appointments, going to info sessions, etc. That'll continue until about May or June, whenever you hit submit. And we also encourage, if you haven't already, taking your standardized exam like the MCAT or DAT, etc. by May, if possible. And the reason why we encourage by May, or even June if we do need that stretch, is because the time it takes for it to load the official score. Because that timing we don't want that timing to cause delays for yourself or for schools when reviewing the application. We encourage submitting within about 4 to 6 weeks of when the application opens. For most folks, that's within June to August. And then, of course, once you hit submit, that's when we're going to start the verification process. Once verification happens, that is when schools start to get your application and they can start sending out things like supplementals. Most allopathic med schools, they're going to send you supplementals. For most other schools, a lot of them have it embedded in the primary application. And we're going to talk a little bit more about supplementals in just a moment. After supplementals, and around that time, we're also going to be doing those situational judgment tests, AAMC preview, if it's required by your school that you're applying to. And then after that is usually when interviews happen, usually beginning in about September or so. And then interviews can start in about September, and they're going all the way until the springtime, usually. And acceptances typically start in October, and then they're going on, they could go on until really before the first day of school. So acceptances happen over a long period of time. And then fingers crossed, we would be starting school in July. This is a really big overview, but we do have an activity to do together to see, well, what are we going to be doing every month? I know I've been doing a lot of talking, so I just want to check in if there's any thoughts or questions before we start this activity together. Any thoughts or questions before we go to the activity? Yes, we are going to post the recording. So as long as you're on our applicant listserv, you'll be notified. No problem. Okie dokie. So I call this the applicant timeline because we're going to really break down everything in the application process. And I know I'm running a little bit over time, so I am going to have the bulk of our content done by 5 p.m. And then, of course, I will still continue the recording with any remaining slides or any remaining questions for the group. And then after that, I'll stop the recording. And if there's any extra questions afterwards, more than happy to stick around if needed. Okie dokie. So if someone were applying this coming summer, ideally, of course, they would be starting school the following summer. If we're applying this summer, 2024, when do you think we might recommend to take or have taken the test already by? For example, like the MCAT or the DAT. Any guesses? Yes, definitely before May. In general, we would have encouraged, if possible, to have taken the test this past summer. However, we're here today in January, and not everyone could have done that, right? You were busy, you were still taking classes, or you were working, etc. So we do encourage taking it by May, if possible. That puts us in a better position. And the earlier we take it, the better. So that way we do know the score, and that can also help shape, our decisions. Like, do we want to retake it, or do we still feel good about applying the cycle? Is there anything else that we want to do? I was looking at data, about half the folks took it in the summer, and then the other half usually take it during the school year. And everyone is going to be different, and that's completely okay. We just want to make sure that you're going to be okay. So if you have questions about your timeline, or if you have questions about how do I help make things fit, let's just have a talk. Let's do a timeline that makes sense, and if we can, have balance as well. Okie dokie. So starting off now, app prep begins. Also, I just want to make sure, can we see the screen okay, or do I need to zoom in? Thumbs up if we're good, thumbs down if I should zoom in some more. Okay, I see one thumbs up. Any other takers? Okay, looks like we are good to go. So app prep is really beginning now. In January, we want to get started on that personal statement. Next week's session is going to be all about the personal statement. So you'll learn a lot of do's and don'ts, tips and tricks, and how do we get brainstorming. And then as soon as you have that first draft, let's start editing. In my experience, applicants can put a lot of pressure on themselves when really we're here to help for this process. We know this is hard. We know this is new and different. And really, if the sooner we meet, the sooner we can make changes, and usually the easier the process will go. In February, we want to get going on drafting the experiences section, both the writing portion, because each experience that you enter, you'll get 600 or 700 characters, depending on the application system you're using. And we're going to want to include everything that you've been doing since the summer after high school. So if you worked at Target, I want to hear about it. If you have an Etsy shop and you're selling bracelets, I want to hear about that too. In addition to, of course, the very important or other things that you've been doing, like clinical experiences, volunteering, leadership, etc., etc. But this is going to be a great place to show how have you been spending your time. How have you been gaining skills in other areas that we can apply to being a future health professional? By March, we want to ask for letters of rec. We want to give them plenty of time. And also kind of considering we do have quite a few pre-health applicants. So there's also going to be other people in the class probably also asking them. We are going to talk more deeply about letters of rec in February, and we're also going to talk about, well, what email template should we be using? What information should we be ready to give, either at the email or closer to when you're ready to apply. For our pre-meds, definitely we're going to encourage going to the spring break road trip. And of course, for our non-pre-meds, we're definitely still going to encourage going to info sessions. This is how we're going to find good schools that are a good fit for you. And the sooner we do that, I promise you, the easier your life will be, especially for our pre-meds who tend to apply to about 30 schools, and our pre-dentals, about 15 schools. For our pre-nursing and pre-PA folks, we do encourage getting started on that process earlier, in fact now, because of how selective they are with their prereqs and other considerations. So we encourage getting started on those lists earlier for those other professions. You're more than welcome to ask for letters of rec earlier. Just keeping in mind that we do still have time, but it's up to you. You know, when are you going to see them next, and all of those other considerations that you have. In April, if we haven't already, we do want to take a sit down and be working on that school list. But again, if we can start going to info sessions now, that's going to be for the best. In May is when most application systems open. So this is when we're going to want to open the app, start putting in information, because they ask a lot of questions like, where did you go to high school? Information about your parents, those kinds of things. We're also going to want to order those transcripts that we were talking about earlier. Send it to yourself and the application system. Lastly, we're going to want to input letter writer information. That way they can get the notification that, hey, they can start uploading that letter. And in June is when some of you, June and early July is when some of you will be, most of you should be ready to hit submit on your application. And so something to keep in mind is we have up until the day that we hit submit to show programs, things in your application. So for most of our pre-med, pre-dental, pre-nursing applicants, that usually means we're not including spring quarter grades because we want to order the transcripts early. If that concerns you, if you have questions, again, let's kind of have that one-on-one chat about what makes sense for you. You know, does that make sense to maybe push it off a little later just to have those grades, or will it actually make a difference? We can always have that conversation. But in general, we have up until the day that we have to submit to show schools things. And so if we need to get shadowing or gain more experiences or those kinds of things, this is really a great time to do that. And if you have questions about what you should be doing, again, let's talk about it. Sometimes applicants wonder, well, what about my application year or my gap year? And gap years are a great way to strengthen your application and build on things that you're doing. But if you're trying to do something for the first time, we wouldn't want to rely on that gap year just to do it because it's not going in that primary application. And I know that that part can be a little bit confusing, so I just wanted to address that here. Okay, so again, ideally we're hitting submit in June or early July. And then July, August, sometimes even September, we're going to be working on secondaries or supplementals. And that's when schools have follow-up questions. And this is on a school-by-school basis. So up until this point, all of this information was going to all the schools that you applied to, no matter what. So your grades, experiences, letters, test scores, etc., that was going to all the schools. So that was not the time to be doing shout outs like, I love you, UC Davis School of Medicine, or vet school, or whoever school. Instead, we're going to save those things for the supplementals. So this is when schools have specific questions for you that's just going to their school. And they can ask anything. And it is going to be a lot of writing. Schools can ask for just one essay. They can ask up to 6 or more. So if possible, you know, we want to really capitalize on this time. While we're in the verification time frame, we want to be pre-writing. And then once we do get those supplementals, we want to have a strategy for doing them. And we're going to talk a lot more about submission strategy during one of our last sessions. That'll happen in spring. Because we don't want to just hit submit to submit again. And we also don't necessarily have to submit on all of your schools at once. There is going to be a strategy that will take a deeper dive when it becomes a future us problem. So up until August or so is when we'll be doing supplementals. And then August to about September is when we're going to get started on interview prep / is when we usually have our interview week. And actually, this is when we get started for interview prep. But we're going to be continuing interview prep until, fingers crossed, you get accepted, really. So Schools can give you as little or as much notice for interviews. So the earlier we get started and prepared, usually for the better. And then by that point, we're going to be in the fall. And so again, interviews are continuing. And then this year we are going to be hosting the pre-health conference in early November, November 2nd. So save the date, join our attendee interest form. People wonder, well, why should I go? You are an applicant in the cycle. This is our chance to connect with the admissions folks, the people that have the power to decide, do you get an interview or not? Will you get accepted or not? Every year, we have so many applicants where they go to this, they make a good impression, they ask good questions, they show their readiness, and they get invited to interviews sometimes that day on the spot and say, hey, let's meet later, or they get an interview invite over email like that Monday or Tuesday. So super important event. We definitely would want to go to that. And then as we continue on, again, interviews are still happening in the winter and spring. Sometimes applicants think, oh, I haven't gotten an interview before Thanksgiving, I'm not going to get in. Absolutely not true. We have so much time in here in the cycle. And so during this time, we're also going to want to talk about how do we communicate with schools. We're going to talk about those strategies again with that submission strategy workshop that we'll do later on. And I just have one more thing to mention, but this is really going to be our timeline for the application. I did forget to mention during the submission time, after that is usually when we're focusing on the SJTs, AAMC preview, Casper, Kira assessment. They're basically just problem solving questions. So here's a situation. How would you go about solving this problem? It can be written, multiple choice, or even video-based responses. And good news is we don't want to worry about it right now. We have plenty of time, and there's no real way for us to study. We are going to prepare, but again, that'll be a future us problem. Instead, we highly encourage, let's get going on. What does your timeline look like? Do you need a more personalized timeline? Make it a little different. And let's get going on the personal statement, the writing, because things are super involved and it can take more time and energy than anticipated. And we're going to be here every step of the way to do it with you and kind of go through that process. I'm going to go to the slide deck in just a moment, but any thoughts or questions before we transition back to the PowerPoint? Spring break road trip is when we invite medical schools to host virtual info sessions. So spring break, Monday through Thursday, pretty much 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m. There's a session each hour with a different med school. And something I forgot to mention, these info sessions, conference, road trip, these are all schools that want to talk with you, UC Davis students. So these are great schools to get to know. And going beyond just like the name brand schools or getting beyond the schools that you've heard of before and really exploring other options. Here's another way to look at the timeline here. And I've separated out MD, DO, dentistry, vet med, and PA. And we do see there are some, minor changes to the general timeline we just did. So I do encourage going ahead and taking a look at this. The PA timeline is generally more accelerated than the one we just did. The vet med timeline is a little slower than the one we just did. So again, big picture, a lot of similarities, but there are still going to be differences. When I send out or when I upload the PowerPoint, there will still be the link to that activity that we just did, so you can take a look at it again. And I will also have these different examples along with some other ones as well, like OT, PT, etc. And again, we might just have to do a timeline that's just for you because maybe yours is different. Maybe we do have to add in a test or those kinds of things. And we want to be able to make a schedule that makes sense for you. I do have some tips for managing the cycle. I do encourage, again, let's get started now, and let's also start brainstorming and tracking hours and contact information for those experiences. We are gonna have, again, that separate experiences workshop session in 2 weeks. So we're gonna talk more about, well, what are those things, or more specifically, but you can start kind of looking through your inbox for those now. We also kind of encourage, be aware of where you're getting your information. The internet is full of a lot of information, and it's not all true. Unfortunately, misinformation does spread. We try to do our best, and when we hear a myth kind of propping up, we like to bust it in our email newsletter or those kinds of things. But again, just being aware of where are we getting information. Is it trustworthy? Does this person actually know this? At HPA, we actually talk with admissions people all the time. We go through our own trainings and other events for advisors just to stay on top of the cycle, because things change year to year. And we're talking with them to see, well, what do they want? What do they expect? What are things that are okay and even not okay? This is all the same thing that we just talked about, but instead I just kind of put it in a list form in case you like lists. And again, just a friendly reminder, if you want to be a health professional, it's not a matter of, if, it's a matter of when are you going to be one. Everyone's journey will be different, and we want to be a part of this journey with you. I know I went a little over time, so thank you so much for your patience. Again, this recording is going to be available, and I will see you next time. Thank you.